You can always tell who controls themselves by how little they need to speak. Most people never notice this until it's too late. They think intelligence is speed, volume, having the last word, but the moment someone disrespects them, questions them, mocks them, interrupts them, their entire nervous system collapses into reaction. Before we begin, if you're new here, you're not here by accident. Something in you has started noticing patterns other people ignore. And for those returning, the sovereign mindset is already sharpening your ability to observe without emotional panic. Turn on subtitles. Some truths are easier to absorb when you read them slowly. Because what you're about to hear isn't social advice. It's psychological warfare most people lose every day without realizing it. There's a reason calm people make others uncomfortable. Not loud people, not aggressive people, calm people. Because calm forces exposure. It reveals who depends on emotional chaos to feel powerful. It reveals who cannot tolerate silence. And once you understand this, you stop trying to win arguments the way weak people do. You stop performing. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. And more importantly, you learn responses that end manipulation without creating more noise. The average person thinks conflict is about words. It isn't. Conflict is about emotional control. The person who governs the emotional frame governs the interaction. That's why some people can insult 10 others in a room while remaining completely relaxed. They understand something dangerous. Whoever reacts emotionally first usually loses psychological position first. You've seen this happen. A calm insult destroys someone more deeply than shouting ever could. A quiet sentence can collapse another person's confidence because the delivery communicates certainty. No desperation, no need for approval, no emotional leakage, and that's what frightens people. Not anger, control. The problem is most people were conditioned backward. Since childhood, they were taught to over-explain themselves. Defend every choice, clarify every intention, seek emotional permission before acting. So now, as adults, they leak insecurity through constant justification without even noticing it. Someone questions them once, and suddenly they're giving a 5-minute emotional presentation nobody asked for. Someone disrespects them publicly, and they rush to prove their value. Someone misunderstands them, and they panic trying to fix perception. But Stoicism teaches something colder. Not every misunderstanding deserves correction. Not every attack deserves defense. And not every person deserves access to your emotional energy. Because many people are not seeking truth when they confront you. They are seeking reaction. That's why the first response is dangerous in its simplicity. I understand why you think that. Most people cannot handle this sentence. Not because it's aggressive, but because it removes friction. It denies them the emotional collision they prepared for. They expected resistance, defensiveness, emotional scrambling. Instead, you hand them calm acknowledgement without surrendering your position. Notice the structure carefully. You are not agreeing. You are not apologizing. You are not explaining. You are simply refusing emotional capture. And psychologically, this creates confusion. Because manipulative people survive through escalation. They expect you to emotionally enter their frame. The moment you do, they control the rhythm of the interaction. But calm acknowledgement without emotional submission breaks their momentum instantly. Marcus Aurelius understood this long before modern psychology gave it terminology. People reveal themselves most clearly when they fail to control your emotions. That's why emotionally reactive individuals constantly test boundaries. They need reassurance that they can still move you psychologically. The moment they can't, the dynamic changes. You've probably experienced this without understanding it fully. Think about the last time someone insulted you expecting anger, but you stayed calm. Their confidence weakened almost immediately. Suddenly they started talking more. Explaining themselves, repeating points, escalating emotionally. Why? Because they lost certainty. Your emotional stability created psychological imbalance inside them. Silence does this too. In fact, silence may be the most misunderstood form of communication in modern life. Weak people fear silence because silence forces confrontation with uncertainty. Dominant personalities often rush to fill silence because they interpret quietness as loss of control. But Stoic individuals understand that silence is not absence. It's observation. And observation makes people nervous. Especially dishonest people. There's a reason interrogators stay quiet after asking difficult questions. There's a reason experienced negotiators pause instead of rushing to speak. Human beings expose themselves when trying to escape silence. The insecure explain too much. The guilty reveal too much. The manipulative overcompensate, and the emotional eventually lose control, which leads to another response that quietly destroys disrespect. You don't have to agree. Simple, cold, unshakable. This sentence changes the battlefield entirely because it communicates emotional independence. Most arguments continue because both people are unconsciously negotiating for validation. They want emotional confirmation from each other. But the moment you genuinely detach from needing agreement, your words become heavier. People can sense it. Neediness has a psychological smell. So does self-possession. And here's the uncomfortable truth most people avoid. Many arguments are not about truth at all. They're status negotiations disguised as conversations. One person wants superiority. The other wants emotional victory. Nobody is listening. Everybody is performing. That's why intelligent people often become quieter with age. Not because they have less to say, but because they recognize how many conversations are emotionally contaminated before they even begin. A man who needs everyone to understand him becomes easy to manipulate. A person addicted to defending themselves becomes predictable. But someone emotionally comfortable being misunderstood, that person becomes difficult to control. There's a difference between communication and emotional submission. Most people confuse the two. They think being calm means being weak, until they encounter someone who can dismantle them without raising their voice. You've probably met people like this before. Teachers, leaders, maybe even strangers. They spoke slowly, never rushed, never competed for attention. Yet the room adjusted itself around them naturally. Presence, not performance. Stoicism was never about becoming emotionless. That misunderstanding has infected modern culture completely. Stoicism is about refusing emotional slavery, refusing to let external chaos dictate internal behavior. And once you understand that, your entire social reality changes. Because you stop trying to win emotionally loaded interactions. You start observing them instead. That coworker constantly provoking others. Observation. That friend disguising disrespect as humor. Observation. That person who only contacts you when they need validation, attention, or emotional reassurance. Observation. The average person reacts immediately because they cannot tolerate the discomfort of emotional tension. Stoic people delay reaction long enough to see clearly. And clarity changes everything. This is where another response becomes lethal. Interesting. That's it. No overreaction. No emotional defense. No panic. Just interesting. You would be shocked how many manipulative conversations collapse after this single word. Because emotionally aggressive people expect resistance or emotional vulnerability. What they don't expect is detached curiosity. Curiosity shifts power. When someone insults you and you become defensive, you psychologically place yourself beneath their judgment. But when you respond with calm observation, you subtly reposition yourself outside their emotional frame entirely. You stop acting like a defendant in your own life. Most people don't understand this because they were trained to seek emotional safety through approval. They think if they explain themselves enough, defend themselves enough, prove themselves enough, eventually people will become fair. But human nature doesn't work that way. Some people benefit psychologically from misunderstanding you. Some people enjoy emotional leverage. Some people provoke because chaos distracts them from their own emptiness. And some people become deeply uncomfortable when they realize you no longer need their validation to remain stable. That last one changes relationships permanently. Because once you stop emotionally chasing understanding from everyone around you, many dynamics suddenly expose themselves. You realize who respected you, and who only enjoyed controlling your reactions. This is why disciplined silence unsettles weak minds. Not because silence is magical, but because silence removes emotional access. There's an old pattern almost everyone repeats unconsciously. When accused unfairly, they rush to defend character. When insulted, they rush to restore image. When judged, they rush to repair perception. Why? Fear. Fear of losing social approval. Fear of rejection. Fear of misunderstanding. But Stoicism asks a brutal question. What if the constant need to be understood is exactly what keeps you emotionally weak? Most people never ask themselves that. Instead, they spend years emotionally exhausted from trying to manage how others perceive them. They become prisoners of interpretation. Every criticism becomes personal, every disagreement becomes emotional threat, and eventually, they lose themselves trying to control narratives they were never meant to control. This is why another powerful response is, "You're entitled to your opinion." Notice how these responses never chase emotional dominance. They don't insult, they don't beg, they don't explain, they detach. And detachment terrifies emotionally manipulative people because manipulation requires emotional participation. Once you emotionally step outside the game weakens. But here's where it becomes dangerous. The moment you start responding this way consistently, some people will accuse you of arrogance, coldness, distance. Pay attention when that happens. Emotionally dependent people often interpret boundaries as hostility because they benefited from your previous emotional accessibility. The version of you that over-explained everything was easier to control. The version becoming calm is not. And people notice, especially those who build comfort around your emotional predictability. This is why transformation often creates loneliness before it creates peace. You stop arguing unnecessarily. You stop explaining your every decision. You stop emotionally auditioning for acceptance. And suddenly, certain relationships begin malfunctioning. Not because you changed negatively, but because the emotional economy changed. Some people only felt powerful when you were emotionally reactive. Once that disappears, they lose leverage. There's another response Stoics understand deeply. No, not angry, not defensive, not guilty, just no. Modern people struggle with this word because they associate boundaries with cruelty. So instead of saying no clearly, they create elaborate excuses, endless explanations, emotional cushioning, and manipulative people recognize this instantly. Every unnecessary explanation signals discomfort with your own boundary. But a calm no communicates something rare today: internal authority. You don't need everyone emotionally comfortable with your decisions. That realization alone can change a life. Because the inability to say no destroys more people psychologically than failure ever will. They say yes to draining relationships. Yes to emotional disrespect. Yes to environments suffocating their growth. Yes to conversations that poison their mind. All because they fear temporary discomfort more than long-term self-betrayal. And self-betrayal accumulates quietly. That's the terrifying part. People don't usually collapse from one catastrophic decision. They collapse from thousands of small moments where they abandoned themselves to maintain external harmony. A laugh they forced, an insult they tolerated, an opinion they silenced, a boundary they weakened, again and again, until eventually they no longer recognize themselves. If any part of this feels uncomfortably familiar, like the video. Not for the algorithm, for awareness. Because most people will spend their entire lives reacting emotionally without ever realizing they were being psychologically conditioned. And comment. Silence is power. Not as motivation, as a reminder to yourself. Share this with someone who still thinks emotional control means suppressing anger instead of mastering response. And subscribe if you're building a mindset that no longer depends on chaos, validation, or emotional noise to feel strong. Because what comes next becomes even more dangerous once you understand the hidden weakness behind over-explaining. Most people think confidence is visible. Real confidence is often invisible. It's the ability to remain psychologically still while someone else loses composure. And almost nobody can do it anymore. Most people never realize the moment they lose control. They think losing control looks dramatic. Raised voices, slamming doors, explosive anger. Usually it doesn't. Usually it looks like explaining yourself to someone who already decided not to understand. Usually it looks like rewriting your personality so nobody feels uncomfortable. Usually it looks like speaking too much because silence suddenly feels dangerous. That's where control disappears. Not in chaos, in unnecessary permission seeking. And once you see this pattern, you start noticing something uncomfortable. Many people do not ask questions because they want answers. They ask questions because they want access. Access to your confidence. Access to your certainty. Access to your emotional state. Think about how many conversations begin innocently but slowly become invisible interrogations. Why are you doing that? Why didn't you tell me? Why are you acting different? Why do you think that? Sometimes those questions are genuine. Sometimes they are not. Sometimes the real question hiding underneath is, can I still influence you? Can I still make you explain yourself? Can I still pull you into emotional labor? And this is where Stoicism introduces a response that sounds harmless but changes the entire structure of an interaction. I've already made my decision. Notice what this sentence does. It ends negotiation. No aggression. No announcement of superiority. No emotional theater. Just quiet closure. People who depend on influence often become uncomfortable around finality. They want openings, cracks, places where emotion can enter and reshape your position. But certainty without hostility is difficult to attack. Most people think strong boundaries require intimidating energy. Usually they require the opposite. Stillness. There's a story hidden in almost every emotionally exhausted person. At some point they learned being accepted mattered more than being honest. Maybe they were rewarded for pleasing others. Maybe conflict felt unsafe. Maybe disagreement created rejection. So they adapted. They became agreeable, available, emotionally accessible, easy to influence. At first people praised them. You're mature, you're understanding, you're easygoing. But over time something strange happened. They started disappearing, not physically, internally. Because every time they ignored themselves to preserve comfort, they quietly abandoned a piece of identity. And eventually one day they looked around and realized, everybody around them felt comfortable. Except them. That realization changes people, because peace built on self-erasure is not peace. It's surrender. That's why another response becomes essential. I'm not discussing this further. Not because you're avoiding accountability. Not because you're incapable of conversation. Because not every conversation deserves infinite access. People who respect boundaries usually recognize this immediately. People who rely on emotional exhaustion usually don't. Watch carefully. The people who become most upset when you stop explaining are often the people who benefited most from your explanations. That truth is uncomfortable, but freeing. You know what's interesting? People often say they want honesty. But many people only want honesty that confirms their expectations. The moment honesty becomes inconvenient, tension appears. You've seen this. Someone asks for your opinion. You give it calmly. They become defensive, not because you were wrong. Because they wanted validation disguised as truth. That's why Stoics become careful with speech. Not silent, careful, because words are expensive. Every sentence reveals something. Your confidence, your insecurity, your priorities, your emotional state. Weak people use words to regulate emotions. Strong people use words deliberately. There's a difference. One reacts, one chooses. This leads to one of the most underestimated responses you can ever learn. Maybe. People underestimate this word because they associate certainty with strength. But sometimes certainty is ego disguised as confidence. Someone criticizes you. Maybe. Someone says you made a mistake. Maybe. Someone disagrees with your perspective. Maybe. You don't automatically reject information because it threatens identity. This response is powerful because it separates self-worth from immediate defense. You don't collapse because someone disagrees. You evaluate. You observe. And that creates emotional stability. People who need to always be right become prisoners of their own identity. Everything becomes threat. Every disagreement becomes attack. Every correction becomes humiliation. Eventually they stop learning. Stoicism avoids that trap. Because secure people don't need immediate emotional victory. But don't misunderstand this. Being open-minded does not mean becoming infinitely available. There's another trap people fall into. They become so understanding they lose standards. So patient they lose boundaries. So peaceful they become passive. That isn't Stoicism. That's avoidance wearing philosophy as a costume. Real calm still has edges. Real peace still says no. Real emotional control still protects itself. And sometimes protecting yourself sounds like another response. I don't see it that way. That sentence matters more than people realize. Because disagreement without hostility is rare now. Modern conversations often demand total alignment. If you disagree, people assume rejection. If you think differently, people assume disrespect. But mature minds understand something younger minds struggle with. Difference is not danger. You don't need to destroy people to remain separate from them. You don't need to convince everyone. You don't need to recruit agreement. You can simply exist. That idea sounds simple, until you try living it. Because you'll discover how many interactions are built around invisible pressure. Pressure to conform, pressure to explain, pressure to perform, pressure to become emotionally legible for everyone around you. But why? Who decided everybody deserves access to your inner world? Not everybody earns that. Some people only deserve politeness, not intimacy. Some people only deserve respect, not explanations. And some people only deserve distance. People hear that and immediately think isolation. But distance is not isolation. Distance is architecture. It determines what enters, what stays, what leaves. You don't build a house without doors. You shouldn't build a mind without them either. Think about someone who constantly drains you. Notice something. You probably don't leave those interactions feeling understood. You leave feeling emotionally extracted. You replay conversations afterward. You think of things you should have said. You feel strangely guilty. That's often not communication. That's emotional overextension. And one sentence interrupts that cycle. I don't need to convince you. Quiet, complete, stable. Because convincing everyone becomes addiction. And addictions always grow. First you want approval, then understanding, then validation, then agreement. Eventually your emotional state becomes outsourced entirely. Now strangers decide your mood. Now criticism determines identity. Now disagreement feels catastrophic. That's not freedom. That's dependence. Marcus Aurelius repeatedly returned to one observation. People act according to what they believe. That means something important. Most disrespect is not actually about you. Most criticism is not actually about you. Most judgment reveals more about perception than reality. Understanding this creates emotional distance. Not indifference. Distance. Someone insults you. Ask, what kind of world must they live in internally for this behavior to make sense? That question changes everything, because suddenly you stop absorbing every action personally. You start seeing patterns. You start seeing pain, fear, insecurity, projection, and strangely, compassion appears. Not weakness, compassion. Because people controlled by impulse are often suffering more than they appear. But compassion has limits. Stoicism never asks you to become emotionally available to destructive behavior. You can understand someone and still leave. You can forgive someone and still protect yourself. You can remain calm and still refuse access. That distinction saves people, because many confuse kindness with obligation. They think understanding means staying. No, understanding means seeing clearly. Action still belongs to you. This is where another powerful response emerges. I wish you well. People think this sentence is passive. It isn't. It can become one of the strongest endings possible. Because genuine detachment ends conflict cleaner than revenge. Imagine someone trying repeatedly to provoke you. Trying to create guilt. Trying to create emotional obligation. And instead of resistance, you simply wish them well. No performance. No punishment. No bitterness. Nothing left to fight. That unsettles people, because unresolved emotional access disappears. And people often chase closure when they lose emotional influence. But closure is not always mutual. Sometimes closure is private. Sometimes closure is deciding, I no longer need this interaction to end differently. That's freedom. Not controlling outcomes. Not controlling people. Controlling participation. And once you start doing this, strange things happen. You speak less, but people listen more. You explain less, but your words gain weight. You argue less, but your boundaries become clearer. Not because you became colder. Because you became harder to emotionally move without reason. That shift changes identity. And identity changes behavior. If this is starting to expose patterns you've ignored for years, pause for 1 second and notice your own reactions. Like the video if you recognize places where you've been over-explaining your life to people who never intended to understand. Comment. I choose clarity. Share it with someone who mistakes endless patience for strength. And subscribe if you're building a mind that values discipline over approval and understanding over emotional noise. Because the next responses are quieter. But they reveal something even deeper. Not how to silence people, but how to stop giving them power they never earned. There's a point where silence stops being a response and becomes a boundary. Most people never reach it. They keep treating conversations like negotiations, even when the other person has already left the realm of fairness. They keep trying to clarify themselves to people who are not confused, just uninterested in clarity that doesn't serve them. And that's where the final shift happens. Not in what you say, in what you no longer participate in. Before we continue, if you've followed this far, something in your thinking is already separating. Not emotionally, structurally. You're starting to see how much of daily communication is invisible competition for control, approval, or reaction. For returning viewers, this is where discipline stops being theory and becomes reflex. For new viewers, this is usually the moment where perception begins to feel slightly uncomfortable, because awareness always disrupts familiarity. Now listen closely. The strongest responses are not sentences. They are exits. I'm not available for this. That is not avoidance. It is precision. Most people stay in conversations far beyond their usefulness because they confuse endurance with strength. They believe staying engaged proves maturity. But in reality, staying engaged in a distorted interaction often signals the absence of boundaries, not the presence of wisdom. A controlled mind does not overstay psychological environments that degrade clarity. It leaves, quietly, without emotional announcement, without justification. And this is where many people would misunderstand Stoicism entirely. They think it teaches withdrawal. It doesn't. It teaches selective engagement. There is a difference. Withdrawal is fear-driven. Selectivity is awareness-driven. One avoids discomfort. The other avoids waste. That distinction is everything. Because once you stop treating every interaction as something that must be completed, resolved, or emotionally balanced, your entire social experience becomes lighter. You stop chasing closure from people who benefit from ambiguity. You stop arguing for fairness with people invested in distortion. You stop trying to make irrational behavior rational. Instead, you begin to recognize something simple but powerful. Not every situation is meant to be solved through dialogue. Some are meant to be exited. That's why another response carries weight. This conversation isn't productive. No accusation. No emotional framing. Just recognition of structure. People often reveal their intentions when they hear this. Those seeking understanding will recalibrate. Those seeking control will escalate. That reaction alone tells you everything you need to know about the interaction. You don't need to decode people endlessly. You observe their response to boundaries. That's enough. And over time, you begin to notice a pattern. People who respect clarity respect you faster. People who resist clarity reveal dependency on confusion. Confusion is useful to them because it keeps you engaged beyond your limit. That is the hidden dynamic most never name. Now here's something more subtle. Not all silence is equal. There is reactive silence, and there is sovereign silence. Reactive silence is emotional withdrawal after overload. Sovereign silence is the refusal to enter unnecessary emotional systems in the first place. One is collapse, the other is control. The difference is invisible externally, but internally, it defines everything. Sovereign silence does not wait for disrespect to escalate. It does not wait for emotional exhaustion. It does not wait for clarity to become impossible. It recognizes early signs and chooses non-participation. That is why another phrase is powerful in its restraint. I'll step away from this. No drama, no explanation spiral, no attempt to correct perception. Just movement out of the frame. Most psychological conflicts persist because both participants remain emotionally available to each other's framing. The moment one person leaves the frame entirely, the conflict loses structure. Think about it. You cannot argue with someone who is no longer participating in the argument's emotional architecture. You can only speak toward absence. And absence does not respond. That is why disciplined disengagement often feels unsettling to others. Not because it is aggressive, but because it is uninterruptible. And people accustomed to emotional access interpret uninterruptibility as loss of control. That is where real power quietly exists. Not in dominance. In non-reactivity that does not require explanation. There is another response that completes this system. I hear you. On the surface, it sounds like agreement. It is not. It is acknowledgement without submission. It allows information to be received without accepting its emotional weight. Most people confuse listening with agreement. But listening is perception. Agreement is alignment. They are not the same. When you separate them, something shifts. You can receive criticism without internal collapse. You can understand someone's emotion without absorbing it. You can acknowledge their perspective without adopting it. This is emotional independence in practice. And it changes how people interact with you. Because they no longer get predictable reactions. And unpredictability, when calm, creates hesitation in those who rely on emotional scripting. At this point, something important becomes visible. The real reason most people struggle with silence, boundaries, and simple responses is not communication. It is identity insecurity. If your identity depends on being understood, you will over-explain. If it depends on being liked, you will over-adjust. If it depends on being right, you will over-argue. But if identity becomes stable internally, communication becomes minimal, precise, and selective. You stop performing versions of yourself. You start expressing only what is necessary. That is why Marcus Aurelius emphasized inner alignment over external validation. External approval is unstable by nature. Internal clarity is not. And when internal clarity stabilizes, your speech naturally compresses. Fewer words, heavier meaning, less explanation, more presence, and something unexpected happens. People begin to project more onto you. Not because you changed, but because you stopped filling every interpretive gap. Silence creates space, and people fill space with their own assumptions. That is why sovereign individuals are often misunderstood in two opposite ways. Some see them as distant. Others see them as deeply intentional. Both projections say more about the observer than the individual. Because clarity without emotional leakage cannot be easily categorized. It simply is. Now consider the final layer. All 12 responses discussed here are not techniques. They are filters. They remove unnecessary participation. They protect attention. They preserve emotional energy. They reduce exposure to manipulation that thrives on reaction. And if you use them correctly, something subtle happens over time. You stop needing them as responses. Because your presence itself becomes the boundary. You no longer need to correct every distortion. You no longer need to address every misunderstanding. You no longer need to resolve every emotional challenge. You simply choose where to engage. And where not to. That is the quiet end state of Stoic communication. Not silence for effect. Not withdrawal for protection. But speech used only when it aligns with internal clarity. Everything else becomes optional. So here is the final command. Not to others. To yourself. Stop entering conversations that require you to abandon yourself in order to remain in them. Because once you stop doing that, something irreversible begins. You are no longer shaped by reaction. You are shaped by intention. And that is where psychological independence actually begins. If this completes something for you, don't just move on. Rewatch it later when emotion is lower and clarity is higher. Like the video if you recognize how often you've overextended yourself in conversations that were never balanced to begin with. Comment. I choose restraint. Share it with someone still trapped in emotional reactivity disguised as communication. And subscribe if you are building a mindset that no longer negotiates its identity through conflict, approval, or misunderstanding. Because at this point, silence is no longer something you use. It is something you've become.